Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Another watch review today, not a vintage watch today, it's actually a modern one. We're going to be looking at the Frederique Constant Classics Index GMT. First, a little bit about the brand. Frederique Constant was formed by husband and wife team Alita and Peter Stas in 1988. In a sense, that's the root of a lot of people's problems with the brand. One is that it's quite new, and the second is that Peter and Alita reached back into history, their own personal histories, to come up with the name, taking the terms Frederique and Constant from their respective great-grandparents who had some dealings in the watch industry. And some people have felt that there's this newcomer that's clearly trying to leverage off Vacheron Constantine's name and jimmy their way up the social status. I think that's a bit unfair, but I'll just put it out there because that is a widely held belief, and if I'm going to do this channel I should tell people what I know. Frederique Constant makes dress and sort of intro luxury sport watches. They have, intro luxury kind of business watches. They've come under pressure to produce sports watches to complete their range. Peter Stas didn't want to do that. He felt that that would be would dilute the message that he was trying to get with the Frederique Constant brand. So he went and bought Alpina. And so if you see Alpina watches, they make pilots, chronographs, divers, that sort of thing. That's Frederique Constant's sports line, the Alpinas. Frederique Constant position themselves as kind of accessible or affordable luxury. Most of their watches are in the kind of 700 US to about 5,000 US range. That will take you from a fairly interesting and well made, but like a slimline quartz down around the bottom end, simple three-hander slimline quartz at the bottom, through to a total in-house manufacture automatic world timer at about $5,000 US. They do stretch beyond that occasionally to create the odd halo product up around the $20 something thousand, where they bring in gold cases and tourbillons, but that's really outside the norm for this brand. As I said before, the Frederique Constant as a brand has a little cloud over it in some people's minds. One is it's new. The other is that there's a feeling they're trying to leverage off some relationship with Vacheron that they don't actually have. And the last one is that they're often accused of being a homage brand. I think that's unfair. I think it is absolutely true, and it's undeniable that Frederique Constant do reach back into some of the more obscure references from the Trinity, in particular Patek, occasionally dragging up ideas about how a modern watch would look. However, I think that's perfectly legitimate. That's not being a homage brand. That's just looking back into history, getting influences and bringing them forward. I've never seen a single instance where you could look at a Frederique Constant watch and say that is a copy of something else. And I've never seen one where you could look at a Frederique Constant and an average person would say that is clearly referencing a particular well-known watch. Even when they do reference older watches and bring ideas into the modern world, these are normally very obscure ideas, very obscure watches that most people haven't heard of anyway. So I think the criticism of Frederique Constant there is misplaced. I think it mostly stems from the fact that they're new and they're affordable, and some people don't like that. I think to put some perspective on where they fit in the watch realm, I think it's important to remember that at last count, I think Frederique Constant have in-house manufacturing of somewhere between 15 and 17 whole modules or even whole movements. So they manufacture GMT modules that they then put on top of base movements that they buy in, but they also manufacture complete world timer watches, complete chronographs, and even tourbillons. So this is they're a serious watchmaker with serious chops in that manufacturing world. In 2016, they were taken over by the Citizen Group. Peter Stas, the CEO, has stayed on, and there's really been no apparent change in how they operate. So that's really about it, about where Frederique Constant fits in the market and what they do. So with no further ado, let's look at the watch itself. So as I said, the model that we're looking at is the Frederique Constant Classic Index GMT. As always, I never remember the reference numbers, so I'll just put them in the screen above me. In terms of manufacture, these watches actually had a fairly short lifespan. They were introduced late 2014, 2015. They seem to have run through to the end of 2018 when they were updated. Personally, I don't like the update. The dial updates sort of made the watch a lot fussier. So the new watch has serifs on the Roman numerals, has more kind of a waffle effect rather than the flat effect we'll see with this dial later. Frankly, I don't like the newer ones. I prefer the older one. In terms of style and shape, it's a simple round dress style watch with a dash of sport thrown in, mainly because of the kind of the really robust steel build and the quite modern look you get on the dials that we'll talk about in more detail later again. In terms of size and wearability, it's a biggish watch, 42 millimeters across, 49 millimeters lug to lug, and 12.5 millimeters thick. So it's a wide-ish case, but at only 49 millimeters, it's not particularly long, so it is quite wearable. And at 12.5 millimeters, that's with some fairly heavy profiling on the sides. It's a very comfortable watch that easily fits under all the cuffs. So this is a very wearable watch for a large number of people. In terms of materials, 316L steel and sapphire sandwich front and back. It comes on a leather band, which we'll talk about more when we get to the band bit. The movement is a Frederique Constant FC 350. Now that's actually a base Sellita SW200 movement. Interestingly, for those of you in the know, the Sellita SW200 is not a GMT movement. It's a plain old everyday three-hander movement with a date and nothing added. So how does Frederique Constant get the GMT function? Entirely in-house designed and built module that sits on top of the SW200, which is one of the reasons why the watch is probably a little thicker than you might think at 12.5 millimeters. That said, by coming up with this module and not relying on the usual custom ETA movement that pretty much everyone else uses for their GMTs, this is a proper GMT with a jumping local hour hour hand, so far more useful than your normal bog standard ETA reuse. So now the mandatory watch stuff. In terms of usability, functions, time, date, GMT. What does Frederique Constant say about this? They say that the Classics Index GMT will become the preferred model for travellers and businessmen who need to know the time in two places at the same time, staying connected with home base whilst travelling away with no time to lose. That's actually pretty fair, and we're going to keep coming back to this this idea of what it is that this watch is, and does it do what it says on the tin. Little spoiler, yeah, it does. It kind of hits those marks perfectly. One of the best things about it is it's got the best GMT implementation for an actual traveller. The jumping local hours hand implementation means that it is very easy to reset the time locally when you move without stopping the watch, without breaking the hacking, therefore upsetting your timing if you were tracking it to the second, without screwing up your date, and without having to reset the GMT hand every time you move anywhere. Some people may prefer, one of the things I would note is the local time hand will in fact only jump in one direction. Some people would prefer it to go the whole hog and be able to jump the local time both backwards and forwards, local Rolex style. I'd note that if you do that, you do lose your quickset date. And personally, as someone who doesn't travel all the time, and does still wear this watch at home occasionally, if I have to make the choice between having a jumping local hour both back and forward but no quickset, or having a no date quickset, or having a jumping local hour hand in one direction but retaining my quickset date, I'll take the latter. I want that quickset for when I'm at home and using the watch the other 80% of the time. In terms of legibility, it's extremely good. When you first look at this, you see these quite thin hands against a sort of an almost polar dial, and you wonder about how the legibility is going to be. I think the super high polish that they've got on these very thin hands means that at pretty much any angle there's always some glint back, so the hands actually do have a significant degree of contrast against the dial, and so they're pretty easy to see. And also, in terms of, they've handled the 24-hour scale quite cleverly by bringing the 24-hour scale inboard, not leaving it right out on the edges, so that the shorter GMT hand lines up directly with those numbers that they've brought into the dial. And that little pop of red on the end of the GMT hand is both visually interesting, but more importantly, makes it really quite easy to see and read the GMT time. As far as controls go, there's only the one, the crown, and it's very good. It's nice and easy to grip, nice positive movements. It stays where it's supposed to, it winds nicely. It's a brand new watch, it shouldn't be anything else but. The band, it's okay. It comes, I've got it with a calfskin leather. It's nothing flash, nice little Frederique Constant branding on the buckle, but that's about it. Probably a little bit thin. You know, compared to, say, the Breitling bands, which are perhaps the best in the business, it's a little lacking. But then on the other hand, we are talking about, even at its best, even in its heyday, at MSRP, $1,000 watch. So that's probably all you're going to get. Given that it's kind of dress watch leaning, a deployant clasp is probably never going to happen. Some watches in this category do have deployants, and I kind of like them. It's one thing that kind of takes away the chance of accidentally dropping a watch. But yeah, again, for the price and for the style, that's probably no big deal. This watch can come on a bracelet. I haven't seen it, haven't felt it. I can't comment on that at all. Okay, as far as robustness goes, it's okay. It's got all the right stuff in all the right places. It's got 50-meter water resistance. It doesn't have a screw-down crown. It probably would have been nice to take that up to 100 and give you the screw-down crown kind of option. Yeah, I know this is a dress watch, but then it's also a travel watch. And given the limitation on this, if you are traveling and if you are thinking that you might go down to the pool or something, you probably need to then take a second watch. I would probably, if I'm traveling, I'd see this as half of a pair of watches. It wouldn't, given the water resistance, I don't think it could do single duty on a trip. In terms of material strength, okay, it's 316L steel and it's sapphire front and back. It's going to be fine. It's a modern watch. It's going to have all the shock resistance and anti-magnetism that a modern watch comes with. In terms of accuracy and movement, look, at the base SW200 is well understood. It's fine. It's a perfectly accurate watch. Frederique Constant is a manufacturer who knows what the hell they're doing. It's extremely unlikely they'll screw that up. There is the Frederique Constant a module that sits over the top of that is less well known. I did some research on the net trying to get a feel for if there was any discussion about problems or accuracy issues associated with that. I couldn't find anything. I've certainly not experienced any, so I'd say you probably it's a no risk. Probably it's not the best movement in the world, but it's certainly a long way from the worst. And yeah, I'd probably just treat it as if it was an SW200. That's the boring stuff out of the way, but now let's get down to the really important stuff. How cool is this watch? Let's start with the looks. It's really simple and elegant and yet modern at the same time. It's a really interesting juggling act that this watch continues to do. First off, if you just look at the dial, at first glance the dial is just this flat grey, but as you get closer and shift it in the light, you'll start to see that there's this really subtle, I'd call it a pearl finish rather than a sunburst. There's no sunburst that comes through, and the effect is probably smaller and more subtle than some of the flakes that you see, the big sort of shiny flakes you see. It's almost like a pearl finish that comes through, which is really subtle. And then there's some other little interesting tricks, like having the alternating indices and Romans, and using the Romans with sans serif, as they say. So without the, for those of you who aren't aware, the serifs are those little daggy bits they stick on the edge of numerals and letters. So sans serif means that you've just got straight bars. And so it's a really interesting idea, the alternating of the indices and the Romans and taking the serifs off the Romans. The Roman numerals give you that sense of conservatism and solidity and style, but by trimming them down and only having half as many, I think it also kind of modernizes the look, and so it's got this really interesting balance going. On top of that, they use these really clean, unobtrusive fonts for all the Arabics that do fit in perfectly with this sort of conservative but still cool and, oh, it's a long way from hip, I shouldn't say that word, but certainly kind of more modern look. The same goes for the case. There's same themes of simple, elegant, but also kind of modern. So you see lots of gentle curves, lots of, not a lot of lines, not a lot of faceting, chamfering, beveling, but where there are lines, they're nice and crisp and clean, and they break up that side, that mid case from the side view. I think that they also, the shaping of the case and giving it not a high polish, but a polish all the way around, again emphasizes this idea of a clean, simple, but kind of elegant look. On the back, there is a sapphire case back. You can see through to the slightly modified movements. Nice copper rotor, but apart from that, it's an SW200 that I don't think has been subject to any particular decoration. So, yeah, nice to see a display case back, but it doesn't give you a great deal. The upshot is, this watch could, though, for all I've said that it's simple and it's elegant and it's cool, it could also be considered boring. Compared to some of the other watches in this class, white, silver, grey, very staid colour palette. It does come in some other colours, but this is, I think, clearly the best, clearly the most popular, so, and it's the one I have, so I'm going to talk about this. Like I said, it is sort of cool and minimal, but it could be considered boring if you want more. But going back to what we said earlier, it nails that brief of being the traveling businessman's tool watch. This is, if you think in terms of a guy wearing a suit, going into a meeting in some foreign place, this watch would look perfect on their wrist. That's the looks, but we don't just look at watches, we feel them as well. And so I'm going to talk now about how they feel. And I'm going to start by saying, how does it feel in the hand when you're sitting there holding the watch in your hand? And it feels, and the feel in your hand matches its looks. All of those things I've been saying about solid, slick, clean. That's all there. There's no sharp edges. There's no hard bits where you'd expect where you wouldn't expect them to be. But where you do expect a nice clean edge, it's there. So the sides of the case where you might hold the watch in your hand, lovely and clean and smooth. But then the edges where the lug cutouts are, crisp and clean and really sharp. Once you get it on the wrist, again, continues to be really good. It sits nice and flat. It's not a particularly thick or long watch, so 12.5 and 49 millimeters. But probably more importantly is the shaping of the side case. The sort of the bulging, curving side case means that there's some taper from the case back up to the widest point of the the widest point of the case, and that means that it's quite comfortable on the wrist, and as you move your hand around, there's no digging, there's no edges jamming into your skin. So what about the messaging that this watch sends to other people when it's on your wrist? As I will cut to the chase really quickly on this, some people, as I said earlier, are quite negative about Frederique Constant. As a result, when they see that you're wearing this watch, they may draw conclusions. They could include that you cheaped out, that you've gone for a homage watch, that you've gone for some uppity new start brand. I don't believe any of that is true, and I don't think that should prevent you from buying this watch. Rather, if someone was to think that about this watch purely because it's from Frederique Constant, probably what that tells you is this is a person whose opinion you shouldn't listen to. But I will put it out there, people will think that about you and this watch if you wear it. I think for more normal people that aren't really into watches, don't know Frederique Constant from any other brand, this watch looks cool. Everyone I've spoken to about it really likes this watch. It's actually with my wife, it's one of her favourite watches. She doesn't like it so much when I've got it on a NATO, but I've put it back on the black leather and she loves it now again. Her exact words were, it looks like something you could work to business, but it's not stuffy. And that probably sums this watch up well. For real watch geeks that understand exactly about the watch, they'll tend to think this is pretty cool. In particular, that someone actually went to the effort at this price point of designing and building their own GMT module and giving you a proper local jumping hour. People who know about it to that level will kind of appreciate this is actually, for what it is, a very cool piece of kit. It's not like anything else. There is no other watch that looks a lot like this at any price point, much less at the price point that you'll pick this up for. So it's certainly not a substitute for anything else. That said, some people do find the way that this watch has balanced its sort of conservatism and modernism a bit off-putting. There have been some comments that people don't like the mixing of the indices and the Romans. Some people really just don't like Roman numerals without the serifs on them. Personally, I love the Romans without the serifs, but some people might not like that. Okay, so what's the price of admission here? These days, as I said, this watch has been discontinued, but these days you can still pick them up and you'll be paying something around $700 to $900 US. So let's put that in perspective. $700 to $900 US from a proper Swiss manufacturer with a Swiss movement and a unique in-house developed GMT module. An interesting and well considered and well executed design with rock solid build quality, and it's uncommon. You don't see a lot of these around. That's actually amazingly good value. So well done. If you can pick up a watch like this for that price, I think we should be really happy with it. In terms of maintenance, the base movements are Solida, so that's not going to be a problem. The unique GMT module on top, who can tell? Frederique Constant's not a small manufacturer. They punch out about 100,000 watches a year, and they have service centres all over the world, so I'd be surprised if it was a problem. Again, research on the net hasn't indicated that there's any huge discussion in forums or anything about problems with this movement, so I don't think that's going to be an issue for you. Finding one. Now, given that it's out of production, this becomes a little bit tricky. With a lot of these kind of middling Swiss brands, it's actually quite easy often to find out of production watches because they're always overproduced. They get dumped to the secondary market and they end up clogging up Joma Shop and similar places. That's not the case here. Yes, some of these watches did get to Joma Shop, but they vanished really quickly. They've been out of stock there for a year or more. I haven't seen them anywhere else. They do crop up on Chrono 24. At any given time, there might be probably 10 or so for sale there. So they are certainly available. Okay, what about alternatives? This is not a particularly crowded area. Now I've left out here, there's quite a number of GMTs coming onto the market that are more diver focused with big bezels and not really in this business space. So I'm going to leave those aside. I'm going to talk specifically here about the dress tool watch kind of GMTs. I think the most obvious example here is probably the Hamilton Jazzmaster Traveller GMT. It's not a bad watch. Unmodified edder movements, which means it's going to be a jumping GMT hand, so it's a suboptimal implementation of the GMT. The design's a little bit fussy, and I'm not in love with the dial. It's not terrible, and my experience with Hamilton watches is they look okay on paper, but when you get them next to the Frederique Constant, you can just see that it just feels like it's $100 to $300 cheaper watch. So I think obviously it comes down to, there are some personal preferences. You might like the Arabics or something, you might like the blue hand that comes with the Jazzmaster, but in general I would say not as clean a design, a little bit fussier, not finished quite as well, and a suboptimal GMT implementation. Probably a more competitive watch, also from the Swatch group, would be the Mido Multifort GMT, which I actually own, and I've done a test of, and I highly recommend. Interestingly that's actually a much bolder design, particularly with the rose gold coverage. It's also more rugged, being a 100-meter water resistant screw down crown, and also the DLC coating for the rose gold further adds scratch resistance to the case. But it's probably less serious and a less substantial watch. It's a little bit more playful, and also when you've got it in the hand up close and you're looking at it, again, like the Hamilton, it just comes off as being just that little bit less substantial, that little bit cheaper. Whereas you look at the hands on the Frederique Constant, they have this real feeling of solidity and quality, whereas the hands and the indices on the Mido and the Hamilton look just a little bit more flimsy, a little bit less refined. Going upscale a little bit, probably spending another $400 or $500, and you can get up to the Longines GMT, Conquest GMT, a very nice watch, but also significantly more expensive. You're looking at spending between $200 and $400 more on it, and you're still stuck with the unmodified edder movement, so you're still stuck with the suboptimal jumping GMT hand implementation, and ultimately still, again, in the hand, it's just not, it's still a bit more sports and a little bit less business. That might be what you want. It is a little bit more robust also, so maybe if you do want that one watch that you can take away, the Longines is certainly an option. But the Frederique Constant, I think, still has it covered for being just a little bit classier, a little bit more elegant, a bit more refined, and as I said, it's got a much better GMT implementation. Okay, so let's wrap this up. All things said and done, do we swipe left or swipe right on this watch? For me, this is a hard swipe right. Deal with some of the negatives first. It could be considered a little boring. This watch is designed for the traveling business person. If that's not you, if you want something that's a bit more playful, a bit more fun, then yeah, this watch might not be for you. Likewise, some people might not like some of the compromises that have been made in that balance of conservatism and modernism. Things like the alternating indices, the sans serifs Romans. So you might not like those things. I personally do, and that's why I'm going to say it's a swipe right here. Across the board, I think this is a really cleverly, carefully designed watch that's very, very well executed and ultimately really good value. It's classy, it's clean, it's modern, but at the same time it's a serious design that stands on its own and balances the needs of business and play really well for that traveling businessman. So that's it. Swipe right on this watch if it's the sort of thing that would fit in your collection. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, or content that's nothing at all like this, and me just ranting about the watch industry or giving homilies about how we should all be nicer to each other. I've been Pete McConville. This is Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.